Hello, I'm Nathan, and welcome back to my gaming table. In my previous video, I talked about Senet, one of the oldest known board games played in ancient Egypt. This game, Season's Race, that I'll be presenting today, is an original game of my creation, invented after I was inspired by Senet. It is a similar type of game, that is a dice and track game in which tokens and players move around a board of multiple spaces from start to finish, racing to reach the end, with their movements generally controlled by the rolls of dice. It's also similar to Senet in having particular marked and special squares, as we often see in these type of games. And, like Senet, Season's Race can be played within the context of a spiritual or religious ritual. In this case, I invented Season's Race to fit best within the frame of a ADF, or nDraiocht Fein, a druidic order's core order of ritual. That is a standard set of steps and operations to formalize ritual procedures. Now, the game doesn't have to be played in that context. As I'll discuss later, it can be played within the context of any pagan ritual or outside of ritual on its own, whether for spiritual purposes or just for entertainment. But its design was originally intended for that purpose, to be a ritual tool. And when I present the play of the game, I'll do so in the context of an ADF core order rite. In this case, it's going to be dedicated to Lu, the Celtic deity, the many-skilled one, and a being often associated with games, one I credit for my inspirations. Now, I mentioned that Season's Race is a dice and track game. You may know some other commercial favorites like Candyland or Sorry that have that same general theme of moving pieces along a track. The board for Season's Race has 30 spaces, which is the same as Senet, and it was also terribly convenient because that's generally the number of days in a calendar month. Season's Race represents the race or transition of two seasons across a boundary, one of the transitions between those two seasons. In this case, because I was doing it in late winter going into early spring, I used the 30 days till the Spring Equinox, literally a calendar page from February 21st to March 21st for 2018, the year that the game was played in Ritual. You could actually use a straight up calendar page as the playing field, as the board. Whether that's February, March, or another month. The game is actually adaptable to different time frames and different seasons. But in this case, the transition of winter into spring is particularly salient. Up here where we are in the Northeast United States, winter holds on tight and doesn't want to release its grip. Not only up to the equinox, but after it. We're well into April, and 2 days ago we had snow. So winter is either a good winner or a sore loser. Now, the game itself can be used as a sort of divinatory tool, an omen, to predict what sort of weather and what sort of seasonal transition you can expect. Similar to pulling a groundhog out of its burrow, but much easier and with less upkeep. It can be used within the ritual as the central working, with the actual play of the game possibly being meaningful, possibly being used as an offering, a gift to the being of the occasion, which was also done in our ritual setup. The game, as I mentioned, was inspired by Senet, and I mentioned that because it's stuck into a ritual context. The 30 days, the spaces, there is one aspect of the game that I consider unique, that sets Season's Race apart from other sorts of dice and track and other board games. That is, the special spaces, the spaces that alter the flow of movement from a strict linear progression to something more complex and slightly strategic, although the game is not actually a strategy game, I'll note. That's because these spaces vary from game to game in their placement and in their alliance. That's because each space represents a particular power, a spiritual being or group of beings that's invoked during the ritual, such as, for example, the Earth Mother, or the spirits of the natural world. Those powers choose where their space is going to be occupied and place markers. Then when tokens reach or pass those markers, it alters the flow of the game. Also, when each of those powers is called into the ritual space, when they're invoked, they choose an allegiance. That is, there's a coin flip or a die roll that determines will they come in aligned to winter or spring. And that's done for each of the powers. So I mentioned the Earth Mother, Mother Earth herself, could come in, which makes sense, allied to spring. She's ready for things to warm up and the plants to start growing. That seems appropriate. However, it's possible that she'll come in aligned with winter. Maybe Mother Earth wants a little more sleep to stay dormant another month or so, resting and preparing. The power grants advantage to its allied season, that is, helps it along its way and aids it in its quest to win. And it disadvantages or hinders its opposing season. So, depending on how that flip or that roll goes, certain spaces on the board or certain rules can favor or disfavor the two players. That I've not seen in any board game to my experience. Let me know if you know otherwise. All right. Now, in addition to being available in terms of the rules, I wanted this to be a game that was accessible in terms of equipment. So I've designed it to work with game materials or objects that you've got lying around. I mentioned that you can make the board out of a calendar page, or you can draw any sort of grid of 30 squares, even use the first 30 squares off of a chess or checkerboard. The other pieces, I'll discuss in the next section, are things that you can generally find assembled either out of other gaming sets or materials that you can gather up. So let's get to that next for setup. For setup, here's the equipment you'll need for Season's Race. Of course, there's the game board. As I mentioned before, any flat surface or board with 30 spaces will work just fine. Numbering them is best so that you can see the progression. You can use a page straight out of a calendar or a clock face where each 2-minute segment is one of the 30 spaces. Go around that clockwise and that works perfectly well as well. You want to set that down on a flat surface. A table, altar, someplace that at least the two players can reach. Ideally something where everybody can see clearly so they can watch the progress of the game. Next, you'll need tokens for the two seasons, the two players. I recommend using one of a lighter or distinctive color for winter, possibly white, a stone, or other piece. I've used checkers, so the lighter color for winter, and the darker color for spring, that being the snowy and the bare uncovered earth. Set those tokens on the first day of the board, in this case, February 21st. Next, you'll need a die, regular 6-sided die. This will be rolled to determine how many spaces each of the seasons moves on their turns. For deciding which side each power is going to be allied with, you need something that will determine a 50-50 roll. That can be your 6-sided die as well. Set, say, odd corresponds to winter, even correspond to spring. Roll once and you'll know which side the power is allied with. Or you can use a good old traditional coin flip. Say, heads goes to winter, tails goes to spring. Or you could have each of the players flip and call it in the air. If they make their flip, then that's their ally. If they don't, then it goes to their opponent's side. Alternately, if you have a couple 6-sided die, the two seasons can roll off for it. Whoever rolls the higher number claims that ally as each power is invoked. All those methods work equally well, whatever you want to use. The last thing you're going to need for equipment is the biggest item, and that is the tokens for the individual powers, the ones that get placed on the board to mark certain spaces. Because of the setup of the game, it's actually convenient if you have a chess set, because the different shaped pieces can correspond to different powers. And when I discuss the individual powers, I'll discuss their correspondences. And the two different colors can match up to which season they're allied with. So, as I mentioned for the Earth Mother, you generally use the Queen appropriately. And if she comes in allied to winter, use the lighter colored of the two queens, in this case the silver. If she comes in allied to spring, you can use the darker colored of the two queens, in this case brass. It's a helpful mnemonic device to keep track of which side each power is going to be allied with. Alternately, for those tokens, you can use a set of colored tokens, anything that fits flat on the board and doesn't take up more than one square, such as, for example, colored bingo tokens, or pieces from another game, or colored stones. The scheme to remember is when you're picking those out, you're going to need 6 different colors. You need 3 tokens of 3 different colors, another 2 tokens of a 4th color, 2 tokens of a 5th color, and then 3 tokens of a 6th color. And again, when I discuss the individual powers and their representations on the board, you'll get how that's broken down. When I played originally, we used the pieces from a game called Discworld, Battle for Ankh-Morpork. And the various pieces, the trolls, the city fires, and so forth, worked perfectly. There were just enough and of the right colors and pairings. So look around whatever you've got available. Again, I want this to be something where people can play with whatever materials they have around. Again, raid your box of semi-precious stones. You might find enough to work with there. That's all you need for setup. Now, let's get into initial gameplay, which starts with the alliance of the powers as they're invoked. Once you're done with initial setup and beginning the ritual, or after setup and as you get set up for the game itself, you'll want to assign each of the powers to its allegiance. Which season is it aligned with? In ritual, as invocation is begun, flip or roll to determine which season is allied, spring or winter. I recommend actually doing that ahead of time so that the invocation to that power can be customized to the appropriate season. For example, again, with I mentioned the Earth Mother, if the Earth Mother is allied to spring, you might want to speak of her fertility, growth, warmth, all the living things bursting forth. On the other hand, if the Earth Mother decides to be allied with winter, you might bring her in as the cold, dormant Earth Mother, resting and gathering her strength, granting the world a period of respite to gather their energies before another season. Also, I do highly recommend that the player who invokes each power, each being within the ritual structure, decide where their tokens, if any, are going to be placed on the board. And then during play, they take an active role in deciding when and how those various abilities are going to be used. This adds more group participation, more involvement to the game, and adds an extra layer of strategy in the sense that they've got to be vigilant and watch for their opportunities to help their allied season and to hinder their opponent. So get as involved as you can, definitely. The main play of the game, the race itself, occurs during the central part of the ritual, during the workings and omen. That is, you'll start playing and taking turns, season at a time, back and forth. Each turn, they will roll the die once, and then move that number of spaces or that number of days along the board. These movements are then going to be altered by the actions of the different powers whenever their spaces are reached or whenever they choose to take action, in the case of certain powers that have global effects. The game ends when one of the 2 seasons reaches or passes the 30th day, the last space on the board, and is declared the winner. At which point, you may want to interpret the omen, possibly get further meaning out of how the play progressed, whether one overtook the other or they changed places during play. The other thing I very much recommend is during play, whenever a certain power is brought in and has their effect, that they describe it as poetically or magically as you wish. Before I mentioned, say, that the Earth Mother could be allied to spring. Then, when spring, their token, reaches her square, the effect of the Earth Mother will be to give them an extra turn, an extra move. You may want to describe it as the Earth retains warmth, the clouds clear away, and shoots burst forth. the earth is helping spring come this much faster. Whereas when she hampers winter, you can mention again the clouds are moved away, the frosts are cleared, the earth melts away the frosts. Again, do as much or as little as you like, but I very much encourage playing up how each turn progresses and what significance it might hold. Now I'd like to talk about the individual powers that are invoked and have specific game effects. This is the longest part of the video and probably the most complicated part of the rules, the core of the game. So I'll try to do this as quickly but as clearly as I can. The first power that's invoked during an ADF core order ritual is almost always the spirits of the land. These are the beings, powers, and abstractions that represent the place where the ritual is being done. The house spirits of the building, the land spirits of the area on which it's placed, the genius loci, or the representation of particular geographic features. Accordingly, the power that the land spirits have within the game is called home advantage. The spirits of the land don't have a particular marker. Instead, their marker is considered to be the entire game board. And what happens is, when the spirits of the land are invoked and their ally decided, they grant that ally first movement. That's the season who gets to go first. Now, this is optional. If for some reason going first would be detrimental, would be a problem, the land spirits may choose to grant that boon to its opposing season. But that's going to be fairly rare. Generally, their ally goes first. Next up in the ritual order is the Grove Patron. And generally this is an ally that works very closely with a grove, or it can be your personal patron if you're running the ritual yourself. A being who has taken a particular interest or been requested to particularly aid the group in all their workings. So for example, here in Erie, our grove, Whispering Lake Grove, our grove patron is Manannán mac Lir, the Celtic deity of the sea, or the son of the sea, who is skilled in, of course, sailing, weathercraft, navigation. He guides the dead to their rest in the other world. So being on the shores of a lake, we've decided to maintain a close relationship with Manannán, and he would be invoked as our grove patron. The patron grants an ability called Starting Position, giving a little extra nudge to their allied season. When the grove patron is invoked, you roll one die and divide by half, rounding up. So get a number from 1 to 3. After initial board setup, the grove patron may choose to move their allied season ahead on the board by that many spaces, 1, 2, or 3 as rolled. Note that this is before play even begins. Next, in most ADF rituals, the Earth Mother is invoked. This is a deity or general representation of the entire world, the earth from which we spring. And this could be in terms of Gaia, Demeter, Matzimna in your Slavic hearths, but a general widespread earth deity. In the game, the Earth Mother's ability is referred to as terrain control. And this is the first of the abilities that's represented by a marker on the board. The Earth Mother picks a spot. Now, if you're using a chess set, you use one of the queens, appropriately enough. If you have other sorts of markers, I recommend using silver, gray, or some other marker that specifically denotates the Earth. Not green. I'd hold that off for later on, and I'll tell you why. But if you have a little Earth-shaped disk or planet, something like that works perfectly. But here I'm using the queens. When the Earth Mother is invoked, the person invoking, or the allied player, chooses where to place that token. It can be any of the spaces on the board. The The only two rules about the placement of markers is they can't go on the first day or the last day of the board, the 1st or the 30th, for reasons that will become apparent. And they can't go in any space that's already occupied by another power's marker. But again, the Earth Mother going first has free reign over the land. So we'll pick a spot, plop her right down on March 7th in the middle. Within play, here's what happens. Either season, when their token would land on or pass the Earth Mother's space, does not pass, they stop there. Any additional spaces of movement are forfeit for that turn. Now, if that's the Earth Mother's allied season, they get an extra turn. They get to roll and move again after landing and stopping on her space. Whereas if it's the opposed season that lands, they don't get another turn. They lose their next turn. That is, after they're done, their opponent rolls and moves twice before that season gets another turn. So, an advantage for the ally and a disadvantage for the opposition. Next up, one that's not included in every ADF ritual, but I highly encourage you do so if you're using a ritual with Season's Race. That is the Sky Father, the counterpart. By the way, if your cosmology dictates, you can reverse that and have an Earth Father and Sky Mother. So that's fine too. But whatever the sky is, their ability is called weather control. That's the atmosphere and the flows above the Earth. This is another ability with a marker. So when the Sky Father is invoked, if you're using a chess set, use the kings, or something gold, a sun, something sky related. And again, not yellow, because that's reserved for another marker. All right, so we had the Queen on the 7th. We'll put down the Sky Father's token on the 2nd, March 2nd. In play, whenever a token either lands on or passes the Sky Father's space, that turn is not affected, but their next turn will change its luck. For the allied season for the Sky Father, they roll twice on their next turn and use the better of the two rolls. For the opposed season, they roll twice and use the worse of the two rolls. Good luck or bad luck. Now, after the Earth Mother and Sky Father are invoked, again, typically the next up is the beings of inspiration. These can be deities or other spirits who aid us in seeing the unseen, in choosing the right words to make our points known, aiding us in song, art, or in the creation of games. Generally my favorite beings to invoke. The beings of inspiration do not have a specific marker on the board, nor do they have a specific phase of play. Instead, they are active somewhere within the entire game. Their power is called persuasion. With it, that power can change the alliance of one other power for one turn, or during setup. More specifically, whenever the participant representing inspiration chooses, they can target one power and say, "I'm persuading you to change your alliance." For that time period, that power acts instead as if their ally were their opponent, and their opponent their ally. Let's use a specific example. We talked about the Sky Father. Let's say that the Sky Father is allied with Winter. But on Winter's turn, when they're about to pass the Sky Father's space, Inspiration steps in and says, "I'm going to persuade you to change your alliance this turn." Now, on their next turn, instead of using the better of their two rolls, that ally has to use the worse of their two rolls. They're treated as if they're the Sky Father's opponent. Note that when the opponent passes the Sky Father, they're still also going to get the same negative, the same detriment. It only affects that one turn's subsequent effects. Also note that if the effect of that power is going to change movement in any way. The ability of persuasion has to be used before token movement starts. It can be used right after the die is rolled and there's an idea of where that token is going to be moving, but it needs to be used before the movement actually occurs so that there's no backtracking or retconning or anything of that nature. I mentioned setup also. So for example, the Grove Patron's ability starting position, that can be persuaded. So if you're in the midst of setup and inspiration decides, I want to change who gets starting position, that advantage now goes to the Grove Patron's opponent instead. So the inspiration only gets to do this once for the entire game. So they may want to be very thoughtful about when and where to use that to its greatest effect. It's a very powerful effect and alters the balance of power, but it gets to happen once. All right, after inspiration, the next being generally called in is the gatekeeper. Now, in this structure, that is a being who has two general roles. One is to protect the participants within the ritual space, to make that space safe and sacred, to keep out negative influences and persons, collectively sometimes referred to as outdwellers, and to also facilitate the communication and contact between worlds, to either open passages to allow things to flow more freely, or to even draw worlds together into a singular space. That's to help the communication so that messages go back and forth more freely, and also so that gifts can be exchanged more easily. Our offerings going out to those beings and their blessings coming back in return. The gatekeeper is asked to assist with these functions. This might be a psychopomp being, like sometimes Mananan. In my rites, often it's Hermes, who knows the ways and the paths between the worlds and helps get you there. But whoever you call on, that function's ability is called, appropriately, Open the Gates, which is also the ritual function the gatekeeper is asked to do. The gatekeeper is represented by two tokens on the board. If you're using chess pieces, appropriately those would be the two rooks. I like those particularly for their movement ability, and the castling move fit the idea of transitioning between worlds. You can also use, as I mentioned before, the color yellow works well, and the gatekeeper matches up well to the east wind, the element of air. Any of those work. When the gatekeeper is called upon, the representative places these two tokens on the board on any 2 days, but no more than 7 days apart, 1 week. So I could put them literally on the 1st, and we'll say in this case the 6th of March, because the 7th is already occupied. Now, during play, when either season's token ends its turn and lands on one of those marked spaces for the gatekeeper may choose to move that token, jump it over to the other marked space. So in practical terms, generally that's going to be to move the allied season forward if they land on the further back space, jump them ahead to the further forward one, or to move the opponent backward from the further forward space to the further backward one. But in those cases where there might be some advantage to moving backward, possibly to get a certain power's effect twice, or to move a disadvantage in moving forward, it's not likely, but it could happen. The gatekeeper has that option. They may go in either direction. Once the gates are opened, then 3 more powers in a particular grouping are called the kindred. That is the spirits of nature, the ancestors, and the shining ones, or the deities. So these are the last 3 that have game effects. They don't have to be called in that order. Your ritual may vary, but this is the order that I'll present them in for now for the game. First up, the nature spirits. These are all the beings, spirits, and so forth that share the earth with us, this mundane world, which could be actual animals, plants, geographic features and objects, or the indwelling spirits of those things, or abstract spirits that represent them. Any or all of those can be considered nature spirits. Your dryads and naiads, your squirrel, and so forth. The nature spirits are represented with a single token on the board. Their ability is called fellow travelers. They're the beings that come along with humanity on this particular journey. If you're using a chess set, the appropriate piece is the horse, or knight. It's the one animal I thought was most appropriate. This also corresponds well with the color green, the north wind, or the season of winter, so on and so forth. So, when it's invoked, the nature spirits are placed on any remaining open space on the board. During play, when either of the season's tokens lands on or passes the marked space for the nature spirits, their next roll is affected. That is, their movement is facilitated or hampered. For the allied season, their next roll is doubled. They can move twice as many spaces as they rolled. For the opposed power, their next roll is halved. So instead of a roll of 1 to 6, at best they're going to get a 1 to 3. That is, divide by 2 and round up. Next up, the ancestors. These are the beings that once were human, but have passed on, gone to the other world, died. They may be more than human at that point, but at the least they're transitioned. Appropriately, in this case, the ancestors' power is called shared burdens. The ancestors can at least share their wisdom from having lived, and sometimes can share energy to aid us along in our work. Or, if a person is hampering the living, the ancestors can possibly hold them back. So, the ancestors are represented on the board by 3 tokens. If you're using a chess set, the 3 pawns. They were pawns like the rest of us, now moved on. This also corresponds well to... Oh, I need to correct... No, I don't. Corresponds to the color blue, the direction of west, or the season of autumn, depending on, again, if you're using an elemental correspondence. But when the ancestors are called in, the mighty dead, put those 3 tokens on any remaining open spaces on the board. Boop. And boop. These spaces are affect movement. They are not counted, they are skipped by the ancestors' allied season. They don't lose a dot of movement for crossing over those spaces, just jump over them. Whereas the ancestors' opposed season counts those as double. They have to spend 2 dots of movement to move through those spaces. Note that this adds an additional effect. If the opposed season is on the space directly in front of one of the ancestors' marked spaces and has only 1 square of movement left, 1 day that it can move, it may not enter that space. It forfeits that move. That counts as much at the end of a turn as if they start on that space and only roll a 1. They don't get to move. So, sort of an extra disadvantage of those marked spaces. Small, but they add up. Finally, the last of the kindred and the last of the powers invoked that has a game effect, the shining ones. Could be the shining and chthonic ones, but this covers deities, gods, goddesses, all the elder, wise, and powerful beings, the ones that some think were here from creation. Any or all of those I'm just going to refer to here as shining ones. In game terms, their effect is called blessings and curses. They likewise help their ally move along or hinder their opponent. The shining ones are represented on the board by 2 identical markers. If you're using a chess set, the 2 bishops, the religious figures, very appropriate. This also corresponds usefully to red, fire, the south, or summer in your elemental correspondences. These 2 tokens, when the shining ones are invoked, are placed on 2 separate spaces on the board, again, out of those remaining. In gameplay, if one of the season's tokens in movement lands on that space, ends its movement directly on one of those 2 spaces, they either move forward or back by 3 spaces. The Shining One's allied season, if it lands on one of those spaces, gets to move forward 3 spaces if it chooses. The opposing season, if it lands on one of those spaces, is moved back 3 days. So those are the 9 powers that are significant to the game, that are marked on the board or marked for their allegiance when invoked. There is one other power that's typically invoked in an ADF core order ritual, and that is the guest of honor. The being or beings that are being honored, gifted, worked for during the ritual. In a sense, the entire game represents that power. It's being played for their entertainment, for their offering, for their guidance. So there's no particular space or other effect that's involved for the guest of honor. Now, when I do my sample game, I'll dedicate that to Lou, the many-skilled. But if you're running Season's Race for a different type of ritual, you might dedicate it to whatever that being or power that you're representing is. There's a few additional points I'd like to address about the design of Season's Race. The first is that advantages, that is, the benefits that are given by an allied power, are always phrased as optional. That is, they're not required to be used or taken by that season. That's so in case that advantage turns out to be a disadvantage, is somehow unhelpful, they can decline it. On the other hand, disadvantages, negative effects, are almost always phrased as mandatory. They must be done if that power chooses to invoke them. Note that for each of the powers, if you look at them closely, their overall effect of that advantage or disadvantage is about the same, about the effect of 1 die roll, or on average 3.5 days of movement, plus or minus. That's deliberate. Note that if the powers are evenly divided, 50-50, as is possible but not always likely, then these advantages and disadvantages are offset. That's again by design. Now, you'll note that 50-50 odds do not guarantee an even division and a balance of half and half. That's by design. The game's meant to have some biases in it, and that's to give a divinatory significance, that the way things skew should be interpreted. Last thing is, I mentioned before that powers can interact. That is, you can have multiple effects influencing a particular turn. You might say, for example, pass both the Skyfather and the Nature Spirits, and so your next roll could be doubling the best of the 2 rolls, doubling the worst of the 2 rolls, having the worst of the 2 rolls. So, depending on which of those are your allies and which are your opponents. Most of these are pretty clear to interpret. You just have to keep track of how many have been piling up. But every once in a while there may be a crossover or a particular outcome that's unclear. For that reason, I recommend setting a neutral referee, someone who's not playing any of the powers or either of the seasons in the game. This might be, say, for example, the senior druid or the ritual coordinator who's keeping everything together and acting as game master. But whoever it is, pick someone who could be called upon to give a fair adjudication without bias. It's just a good idea in general, but especially when odd things can happen. Here we are. I've done initial setup for the game board, and we're going to run through a ritual structure, a full core order ritual, or as complete as I can manage in this time, and the gameplay, stepping through and explaining each step, hopefully to give you a clear idea of how the game is played and used. All right. We begin by calling on the spirits of the land. I'll roll for their alliance. Odd rolls will be winter, even rolls spring. Odd. The spirits of the land are allied with winter. I've used note cards as a reminder of which is allied to which side. Spirits of this place, you lie dormant and calm, allowed to relax for a time from the treading of our feet and the business of our days. We ask you to observe and to take your part in this ritual tonight, to bless our work and grant us leave to do that work in your space. Spirits of this land, be welcome. Next, calling upon patron, our grove patron, Mananan Maclear. Even, patron is allied with spring. Mananan Maclear, I call out to you as patron of my grove and aid to my practice. You see the skies clearing, the seas thawing and cracking. It is time to sail forth. Take us with you on your journey, ever forward, ever toward new lands, new thoughts, and benefits. Next, we'll call on the Earth Mother. Odd 3. The Earth Mother comes allied with winter. Place the Queen. Mother of the sleeping earth, you rest with the land. You lie locked and cold. With you, we seek calm. We seek reserve to prepare us for what is to come. Join us now for this rite. Lend your aid and your guidance, please. Earth Mother, be welcome. Next, we'll call on the Sky Father. The Sky Father is also allied with winter. And we'll place his, actually we'll put him early in the arrangement. Note that the choice of which space to place a particular marker on is up to the participant who's invoking that power, or if there's only 2 players or 1, then it goes based on the preference of the allied season. So, Skyfather, appropriately enough, I'm explaining things, trying to illuminate what is going on, trying to motivate and bring a spark. In this season, you often bring ill weather, cold winds and snow, which is also a form of guidance, a reminder that nature has its terms and its cycles, that it moves as it will, and we need to recognize and accommodate it. Skyfather, lend your aid and your guidance to this ritual and this game tonight, please. Skyfather, be welcome. Now the beings of inspiration. That one's on Spring's side with a roll of 6. Beings of inspiration. In this case, we see how you can turn the tide to change minds and hearts, to make the unclear clear. We ask that you lend your aid again tonight, both in this game, in this rite, and in my presentation. to the viewers so that they better understand what is being presented and done tonight. Beings of inspiration, be welcome. Take a moment, viewers, to think about the purpose for which we are gathered, to play a game, to learn a skill, and to honor the guest who is to come, Lou the Longhand, the many-skilled, the wise and clever one, and the patron of games. With this in mind, we prepare our space, our hallows, and call upon the gatekeeper. So, preparing my fire, I have my well filled, and a representation of the great tree. Also, lighting some incense to sense the area. To cleanse, purify, and prepare it for work. Likewise, asperging the space for its purification and preparation. With those preparations, we call upon a gatekeeper. In this case, I'll call upon my personal patron, Hermes, the boundary crosser, the walker between worlds, he with access to Olympus and Hades. Clever one to mislead those who would do ill, who would interrupt these workings. I ask your aid in the game, in this ritual, and in all my workings, that they might be successful, that they might bring prosperity. Tonight in particular, we ask that you act as guide to bring our gifts, to deliver them well, to bring back the blessings that we seek, to likewise transport our words and the messages of the beings who would attend us. Since I've forgotten to roll. All right. The gatekeeper, Hermes, will come in, allied to Spring. This is the first of the pieces we're placing on the board that are Spring's allies. We'll go with what we went with before. A full week, the 1st to the 7th of March. Gatekeeper, be welcome. Now, Gatekeeper, we ask that you reach across, take our hands, and link the ways between the worlds with the paths open. That are well, reaching down to the source of all waters, connect us to the mighty dead. Let our flame, reaching to the source of all light and fire, connect us to the high and shining ones. And let this tree, joining heaven and earth, the axis of the world, connect all the worlds to us as one. Gatekeeper, please open the gates. Now that the ways are open and the worlds are joined to one another, we call upon the mighty kindred. Calling the nature spirits. The spirits of nature with a roll of 2 are allied to Spring. All right, the balance has shifted. Spirits of nature, though the land is cold and the weather seems locked upon winter, you are ready to wake, you are ready to spring forth, to grow, to breed, to make the world fertile and lively once again, and we are with you. We look forward to seeing your mortal forms, to seeing your influence upon the world. We ask that you join us tonight for this ritual, for this game, lending your guidance and your influence. Nature spirits, be welcome. Where do we want to place them? This is probably a good place to mitigate the effects of the Skyfather. So let's put it right afterward, since they're of opposed alliance. Next, the ancestors. Roll of 3, the ancestors favor winter. Take the light-colored pawns. Ancestors, mighty dead, those passed before us, we ask you too to lend your aid and your wisdom. We remember that life can pass too quickly and be over too soon, that we need to enjoy these moments of peace and quiet, even in the depths of winter when we may be locked within our homes. We will remember to make the most of them, to play games, to find joy. Ancestors, be welcome. All right, let's place these. I've picked these largely at random, but wherever they go, they're going to help winter and hinder spring. Last of the kindred and of the powers in the game, the shining ones. The roll of 4, shining ones are allied with spring. Get those 2 bishops. Shining ones, gods, goddesses, and those without. We ask that you also join our workings tonight, to lend your wisdom and your guidance and your influence. Even when you are not remembered by name, let us be mindful of your status. Shining ones, be welcome. All right, and they get extra spaces to move. Let's go here. And yeah, why not? One there. Now, all the markers are on the board and all the powers are assigned. It is now time to call in our guest of honor to join these proceedings and observe how they go. Lu Sueldanach, many-skilled, the long arm, he who mastered official, who held games in honor of his past foster mother, Taltu, who no doubt won at every sport he put his hand to. We ask your presence to be honored tonight in the playing of this game and in the teaching of it to others who observe. May it please you. Lu, be welcome. With that, we are ready to play as an offering, a sacrifice, and an omen for Lu and from Lu. So, as we said before, the spirits of the land are allied with winter. Winter will go first. Starting position is controlled by the Grove patron, Mananon, who is allied with spring. So let's roll for him. rolled a 4. Divide by 2, that's 2 additional spaces. Before play starts, spring starts ahead. So let's start with the first turn for winter. A 1. Not much is happening here at the beginning. Spring's ahead a little, winter follows slowly. Now for spring. 1. Time crawls. For winter, another 1. Oh my. Spring. 1. Sometimes you just have to take things as they come, bit by bit, piece by piece. Now spring has landed on the space controlled by the Skyfather, which means his next roll is going to be the worst of 2 rolls. It might be another 1. All right. Now winter. Ooh, winter rolls a 5. At this point, the beings of inspiration are going to step in, using persuasion on the Skyfather, saying, reverse your effect. 1, 2, winter passes his space. 3, I'm going to pause there. On their next turn, winter, who was the ally of the Skyfather, is going to act as its opponent because of the persuasion of inspiration. So they're also going to use the worst of the 2 rolls. Note, here's this combined effect again. On its third space, winter passes the nature spirits, who are allied to spring in this game. So not only is it going to use the worst of its 2 rolls, it's going to have that roll. Combined effect. All right, that was 3, 4, and this would be 5, but the ancestors occupy this space. So winter skips it and actually effectively moves 6 days forward. It's a good turn. The next one's going to be a little lousy. It's also, by the way, winter has landed on one of the spaces controlled by the gatekeeper, but the gatekeeper is allied to spring and doesn't want to move winter forward to its other occupied space. So it declines to cause its effect. That ends the turn. After a really slow start, things are moving along now. Let's go back to spring. Because of the Skyfather's effect, I'm going to have to roll twice. It's a 3 and a 6. So it gets the worst of the 2, the 3. 1, 2. Here's another rule coming into play. Its third space is occupied by the ancestors who are allied to winter and oppose spring. It had only 1 space of movement. It went 1, 2, but it can't go that third space because it has only 1 more space of movement, and entering the space costs 2. However, next turn, because it just passed the nature spirits, it's going to get to double its roll. So this is not going to be nearly so much of an impediment. Back to winter. Winter is suffering from take the worst of your 2 rolls, thanks to the reversed effects of the Skyfather, and half that roll because of the effects of the opposed nature spirits. Here we go. A 5 and a 2. Rolled a 2 as the worst of the 2, and half it because of the nature spirits. 1 space. Oh dear. That 1 space puts it on the Shining Ones, who are allied to spring. Move back 3 spaces. 1, 2. Note that it doesn't want to skip this space, the allied space for the ancestors, because that would be a negative effect. It would have to move further backward. So the ancestors waive that option. And 3. Winter and spring are occupying the same space. So despite that leap forward, all the other effects combine to keep them neck and neck. If you're doing this again for gameplay for divinatory purposes, that looks pretty significant. Now we're back to spring's turn. Having passed the nature spirits last time, they get to double the next roll, which is a 1, which fortunately doubled is enough to get them onto this space, which normally would have required a move of 2. Bit by bit. Winter's turn again. 6. Okay. Skip the ancestor space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the Earth Mother's space, who is allied with Winter, but still requires you to take a moment to pause. So, Winter loses the next space of movement. It's a shame. They don't get all 6. But they get to roll again, take another turn thanks to the Earth Mother. Oh, rolled a 4. So, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're in an open stretch. No more alterations on movement. Okay. Back to Spring. No alterations on the roll itself. Now, 1 would be awfully nice to land on the gatekeeper. But no, it's a 4. Not that lucky. 1, 2, 3, 4. Really unlucky. Because next turn they're going to get paused by the Earth Mother. All right, Winter is shot ahead. Let's see if it can continue its run. 6. Oh yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Skip that space. 6. Another space controlled by the ancestors, so skip it. Spring's trying to catch up, but it really doesn't matter because whatever it rolls, in this case it's a 3, it's going to have to stop at the Earth Mother's space. And wait there and lose its next turn. Well, it looked like Spring and Winter were keeping up neck and neck, but Winter has pulled far ahead now. Its allies are proving the more powerful. 3. 1. Skip it. 2. 3. One more day to go. And Spring is still stuck at the Earth Mother space. Roll again. 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And off past the end of March and into April. Which, honestly, if I was running this as a divination, it would fit the way things are going right now. We've had snow twice in April. So Winter just keeps going and going and going. That's the game. Once the game is completed, we have a winner, Winter. We have an idea of how the play went, how the different powers that were invoked, how their allegiances fell. The world, the earth, the weather, all are favoring Winter. And that kind of turned out decisively. But the biggest advantage, I think, came from these ancestors that halted Spring on one turn and gave 3 extra spaces of movement to Winter. So, yeah. Maybe it's the dead. Maybe it's our effects that have accumulated over the years. The actions of those ancestors have given us a longer winter. Something to think about. All right. Let's close out the ritual and thank the beings that have attended us and given us this game. Mighty Lu, I hope that you are well pleased by the play of this game and by its explanation for my audience. Thank you for attending, for lending your aid. Lu, we thank you. Shining Ones, gods, goddesses, and other, thank you for attending, for observing, and lending your influence to the proceedings here. You had your role to play, and we thank you for it. Shining Ones, we thank you. Ancestors, your influence has proved decisive, and we will remember that what has been done before us echoes and influences our time, with nothing that can be done about it but to act as we will to the best. Thank you for the reminder. Ancestors, we thank you. Spirits of nature, we saw your effects as well, and we look forward to seeing the coming warmth and growth with you when it arrives. Thank you for your presence, your influence and guidance. Nature spirits, we thank you. Gatekeeper, Hermes, I call upon you once again, now to aid us in parting the worlds and closing the ways, so that we may return to our separate concerns, to clear our minds and spirits, maintaining contact, but doing what is needful here and now. Let this well, connecting us to the depths, the primal waters, and the underworld, become again only water. Let this flame, once reaching up to join us to the heavens and the shining ones, be once again but fire. May this tree, connecting all the worlds, as axis, as bridge, become again but wood. Gatekeeper, please close the gates. Now that we've returned to our own world and place and time, we thank the others who have attended us tonight. Spirits of inspiration, I thank you for helping me continue to talk through this long process. And thank you also for guiding the minds of those who listened. Hopefully, we've both done well and they've understood what was conveyed. May you continue to give us the right words and the right understanding, and to help us in creating good works. Beings of inspiration, we thank you. If I didn't say so before, Gatekeeper, we thank you as well. Sky Father, Guide of the heavens, ruler of the storms and the weather that blows across the world, we see, we remember your might. We are mindful and appreciative, even when those storms are not to our liking. Sky Father, we thank you. Earth Mother, we rest on and ultimately in you. We accept your gifts as they are given. We bear in mind to stock those against those times when you cannot provide for us. Thank you for your guidance and your presence here tonight. Earth Mother, we thank you. Mananan, patron of my grove, and aid to our practice, we appreciate your presence, your guidance, now and always when we meet. May you continue to point us in the right direction and to steer us away from hazards and misunderstandings. Mananan, we thank you. And finally, beings of this land, spirits of my home, of the realm where I occupy, of this land about me, thank you for being present, for supporting, for tolerating our presence, our use of you. Spirits of this land, we thank you. And with that, take a moment, draw down your energies and connect yourself to the world. This rite is ended, and I'll see you a moment for some final discussion. Finally, I'd like to talk about some of the possible variations of the game. Now, I mentioned several times this was originally designed as a game to fit within the structure of an ADF core order ritual. And it can be adapted to fit other ritual structures for other traditions. I definitely encourage you to give it a try. The game can also be played outside of ritual, whether as a separate divination or just for entertainment, you can, in that case, rearrange the invocation of the different powers and the order that they're placed on the board however you like. Or feel free to add or subtract other ones within the same guidelines, making sure their powers cause about plus or minus 1 die roll, about 3.5 days of movement. The other thing is I designed this as the transition between winter to spring because that was what was salient at the time and in the place where it was created. But you can certainly use the game to represent any other seasonal transition, from spring to summer, summer to fall, or fall to winter. And that last one I'd like to try as the representation of the final month of fall and the final harvest. The question being, depending on which side wins, fall or winter, will we be able to gather the final harvest before the frost sets in and starts killing the plants? That would be the 30 days of October, 1 through 30. And if fall wins, then you've probably got time before it gets snowy. If winter wins, you might want to bring in that harvest early. Last of all, I made the game with 30 days to match up with Senet's 30 spaces, but that's not a hard requirement. You could use a lunar month, 28 days instead. You could make it 21 days, such as March 1st to the 21st, and using the calendar page for March. It'll just produce a slightly shorter game. Similarly, if you wanted to run 2 months, say the last month of winter and the first month of spring, to look at that span, you could do so. That'll be a 60-day board, or 56 if you're using 2 lunar months. It'll just make it a longer game with more spaces to traverse. Now, I highly encourage you to try the game and to try your own variations. If you are interested and would like a copy of the rules outside of this video, please contact me, either here on YouTube, on my Facebook page, it's Nathan Large, or my business page, Luminathan Games, also linked in the description. Or, if you're a member of ADF, you can look for the Games and Play Special Interest Group's Grove Game Book. The full rules for Seasons Race are contained there. You can certainly contact me or any of the other organizers of the Games and Play group. I hope you will give it a try, but whatever you play, have a great game. Thanks.